apparently it's considered problematic to do a worst of the year list, so let's do it. And yes, I acknowledge that every movie I'm about to mention here had some amount of effort put into it. I mean, making movies is hard. But that's no excuse not to criticize them or to say that they were the worst of the year. We're not celebrating failure despite what some dipshits might say. We are the customers who paid money and time to watch these, and they sucked. We have every right to point out that they sucked, why they sucked, and honestly, filmmakers should be watching these worst of year list videos just to see where they went wrong, what people disagreed with on, because admittedly some movies just aren't for everybody, and hopefully they can learn what to do better next time around. And if nothing else, it's therapeutic to rant and rave about the waste of time and money that we spent on these. Adam Driver crash lands on Earth in a race against time to kick some dinosaur ass and escape the planet before the meteor hits. And the big twist is, he's not a time-traveling human, but a humanoid alien from a faraway, much more civilized planet. From the guys who wrote A Quiet Place, this is such an ingenious original concept that goes fucking nowhere. I barely remember a thing about 65 other than the incredibly forced flashbacks about Adam Driver and his daughter that were clearly supposed to be fleshed out a hell of a lot more. The cheap jump scares that, when you look real close, the original edit was clearly supposed to build up the tension. Again, like the fact that he's a humanoid alien from another civilized planet that is never explored, never expanded upon when, again, clearly it was supposed to, just gives me the impression that the studio interfered big time with the final cut. And talk about a huge missed opportunity. Look, I knew this wasn't going to be subtle. In fact, that was the reason I wanted to watch it, but there's no art in not giving a fuck presented in this movie. If you can even really call it a movie, it's really just an hour-and-a-half version of a Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan motivational video, except those ones I actually learned something because they actually give you steps on how to improve your life and how not to give a fuck. I've never read Manson's books, so for all I know, it could have just gotten lost in translation, but the majority of this is just him sitting in a random room recounting the shittiest moments in his life and one other person. And not gonna lie, there were some decent recreations, but he never explains how he dug himself out of these situations or how you can dig yourself out of these situations. There's no clear example as to why he even became a quote-unquote self-help guru, even though he probably wouldn't even consider himself that. And I wouldn't either, because I got, like, no valuable advice from it whatsoever. I had to check on my letterbox to see that this was the first movie I saw in a theater this year. That's how forgettable Plane was. The one thing that sticks out about Gerard Butler as opposed to the other generic good guys he's played is that he actually uses his real accent for once. That was kind of neat. It didn't add anything, but it was neat. Mike Colter was extremely underutilized, barely had anything to do, and was stuck with so many shaky, over-edited action sequences, including one of the worst long-take fights I have ever seen. I give the movie a little bit of credit for trying to take a grittier, more realistic approach to a generic popcorn flick, but that's the thing. It's a generic popcorn flick trying to be smarter and more real than it should be, and it was another case where being too realistic made it less entertaining. Thankfully, the only bad movie I saw at TIFF this year, Boy Kills World, is Hunger Games meets Deadpool with the violence of Kingsman, and sucks at ripping off all three. Having a deaf hero inner monologue the whole damn movie is just such a stupid idea. It gets boring so quickly, as does the eat the rich metaphors, if you can even really call them that. They're just screaming how bad rich people are without even explaining why. They couldn't even make well-staged, creatively bloody fight scenes look good with how hyperactive the camera work was. If this was about Corey, Sean, and Feeney going to military school, then it would live up to the title. I don't know what was worse, sitting through this movie, sitting next to a woman who took a call halfway through, or the fact that I had to review this twice because of shitty Apple support. Even if this didn't have the dumbest characters and most massive plot conveniences I've seen all year, even if it didn't have laughably bad acting from people who are much better than this material, if the scares were good, if this did anything different from a Dracula movie, which, in theory, it should have. I mean, an entire ship in the middle of the sea trapped with Dracula on board. This should have been a hell of a lot better than what it actually was. But even if any of that was expanded upon, if any advantage was taken, I do admit that I still would have had bad memories about it, but, yeah, it still sucked. If you wanted to see Joaquin Phoenix give a dull, lifeless performance, seriously, I've seen interviews of him where he cared more. As one of the smartest rulers in history who's portrayed as this lucky bastard and impotent incel who has no chemistry or any real reason to have chemistry with his wife, and crappy battle sequences that are so poorly lit and quickly cut together you can barely make out what's happening. And I'm glad you enjoy it, I just didn't. I was actually going to review The Sun in January when it came out in my area as one of my silent reviews. To be honest, it would have been easier to review silent than with words because outside of one really good scene featuring Vanessa Kirby and her stepson, a relationship that you rarely, if ever, see in movies, and was done with extremely good tension and authenticity, I didn't give a shit about anything that was going on. Which is a real shame because you have Hugh Jackman, Laura Dern, Vanessa Kirby, Anthony Hopkins in a well-acted but completely pointless scene that's just riding off the success of the father. In fact, I was convinced that he was actually playing the father from The Father, which would have been in really bad taste when you know what The Father is really about. And all these actors do as best as they possibly can, but they're stuck with such a melodramatic script that is so Oscar baity, filled with monologues and mental breakdowns that just have no weight to them, mainly because of the son and his arc. I don't want to put any crap on this kid just because he is still a teenager, but I mean, kids his age can act well regardless of who's directing them, and he's not one of them. And the other problem is, what is this kid actually going through? Is it depression, high anxiety, psychosis, bipolar disorder? The script literally doesn't have the balls to ask what kind of problem this kid is dealing with. Which, I got news for you, if you're going to tackle a mental disorder of any kind in a movie, it doesn't matter how authentic you are going to piss people off regardless. Have some balls and be fearless, because that is what it actually takes to make a difference for someone who's watching it, assuming you even believe that people can influence themselves by watching a movie. How long was this kid actually dealing with these problems? How come their parents seriously didn't notice until now? And why does Hugh Jackman let this kid off the hook time and time again, regardless of whether he's in a crisis or not, for doing some insanely stupid shit? I could go on, especially with the fact that Hugh Jackman inadvertently causes the ending of the movie in such a contrived way that the second it was introduced, you knew it was going to come back to fruition, and they didn't even bother hiding it. I haven't actually seen The Father, and by all accounts, people really loved it, so I don't know what the fuck this director was thinking. We're down to the top 3 movies that I couldn't even review because it just completely sucked the energy out of me. And of all the things on this list, Hidden Blade had the most amount of potential because it could have been an engaging spy thriller, especially with an actor like Tony Lewin as the leading role. But unfortunately, this is one of those spy thrillers where the spies really do nothing other than sit around in circles and give expository monologue after expository monologue about the cool shit that we really want to see. We want to see these guys spying. We want to see these guys get tailed. We want to see these guys fight their way out, assuming they can even make it out alive. And you don't even see any of that until this okay enough fight scene about 20 minutes towards the end, if I am remembering all of this right. And even by then, it was too little too late for me to care. Not to mention the political beliefs in this movie make it out so that you really have to agree with everything these characters do in order to latch onto them. And if I have to agree that communism is the best ideology ever and that is completely peaceful with no violent repercussions whatsoever, past, present, or future, you're out of your fucking mind. I know putting Jonathan Majors on the thumbnail was clickbaity, but out of all the reviews that are saying, yes, the movie's bad, but Jonathan Majors was good as Kang, I didn't buy into that. What everybody else was calling the next potential Thanos a good Marvel villain, I was just sitting there watching some guy who thinks that pursing his lips and doing the Gilbert Gottfried squint is enough to instantly make your villain look intimidating, especially when he randomly lashes out in anger for absolutely no reason whatsoever. And Kang did that, the High Evolutionary did that. Whatever other Marvel villains are out there that I seriously can't remember. The point being, that doesn't make your villain good. It makes them pretty fucking lame. And as lame as the other Ant-Man movies were, they were creative with how silly they were. They embraced them. They had fun with the tone. There was surprisingly a decent amount of character development towards everyone. And Michelle Pfeiffer, I think, is the one character in this where you actually learn something new about her. And to her credit, she acts her ass off to make anything she can out of this material. But no matter how good an actress you are, we can't forget the fact that this is really fucking dumb, even by Marvel standards, for you to just wait until you're in the quantum realm to explain what is in the quantum realm, the dangers that can happen if something were to get out of it, or someone, especially this blue smurf dictator who gets his ass kicked by Ant-Man in his first introduction ever. Wow. For every good scene, and in all honesty, there are one or two, there are 4 or 5 others that are everything wrong with the Marvel Cinematic Universe at this point. The jokes are absolutely shit. The identity politics are so one-sided and so... just have this sense of false virtue signaling because it's clearly done for the audience's sake, not because they actually believe any of this bullshit. The effects, as per usual, are completely half-assed because, God forbid, you have to spend money on quality special effects that make the world and the movie special, and the plot conveniences where everything gets wrapped up at the very end with no loose ends, even though it makes absolutely zero sense for heroes to not make sacrifices, or at least I think they didn't. I don't know. I didn't stick around for the end credits because I just didn't fucking care. And to be honest, I don't care what happens to Marvel at this point. They have fucked themselves over so royally that Guardians 3 is not going to save anything. I don't know anything else about Quantumania other than it pissed me off, but it didn't piss me off as much as number 1, a movie that you are never going to guess because other than China, it wasn't really that big of a hit. And to be honest, I'm not even entirely sure how that was the case. Zhang Yimou directed Hero, House of Flying Daggers, Shadow, and the incredibly underrated 1 Second. Like, what the fuck happened? Why was this 2 hours and 40 minutes when it did not need to be? How come it was trying to be a thriller and a comedy at the exact same time with no sense of balance and tone, something that he's clearly capable of doing? Why were there tons and tons of filler sequences of characters just slowly walking from hallway to hallway, really taking their sweet-ass time, listening to this off-key, incredibly annoying, high-pitched rap music from a woman who could not rap to save her life? There were so many plots and subplots revolving around way too many characters to keep track of, especially with the insane amount of predictable, pointless plot twists that really bogged down the runtime for absolutely no fucking reason. It was poorly edited, too. It cuts away to every person in between their talking, which is weird because Yimou is usually so much more meticulous about his editing, his cinematography, his fucking everything. This just felt like he was on autopilot the entire fucking time. I knew this wasn't going to be a martial arts movie, but he proved with 1 Second that he doesn't need to make martial arts movies in order to be entertaining. He just needs good stories, and I'm not convinced that there even was a story because I can't even fucking remember what the mystery was that they were trying to solve. Okay, you know what to do. Have a shower, get dressed, and go watch some good movies that you can make into a best of list. Your best of list is not going to get as many views as the worst of, because admittedly people really click on the worst of more because it's just fun to hate stupid shit. But you know what? I need the best of lists to do better because for my own sanity, I still need to have faith in cinema these days. So let's do this.